These individuals have weaponized government, and we risk revolution, whether it's CEOs being murdered in the street, whether it's a Me Too movement that had righteous components of it, or Black Lives Matter. What are these movements? They are targeting the wealthy. We are in the midst of a series of small revolutions to correct income inequality. And the reason we put an insurrectionist and a rapist in office is because for the first time in our nation's history, a 30-year-old man or woman isn't doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. Why? Because the majority of households are having the oxygen sucked out of the room, such that a small number of individuals and a small number of companies can be worth more than nation states. Income inequality is out of control. Our tax policy has gone full oligarch.
Scott Galloway went on Morning Joe to tell more truth than anyone on television news has ever been told about our rampant redistribution of wealth to billionaires and corporations. So much so, Mika Brzezinski was forced to make a clarification about one word he used at the end of that interview. Listen to how that last point he made ended.
And the reason we put an insurrectionist and a rapist in office is because for the first time in our nation's history, a 30-year-old man or woman isn't doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. Why? Because the majority of households are having the oxygen sucked out of the room, such that a small number of individuals and a small number of companies can be worth more than nation states. Income inequality is out of control. Our tax policy has gone full oligarch.
I want to make a comment, though, just about a word that was used in this interview. Donald Trump was tried civilly and was found liable of sexual abuse, not rape. But the judge in the case likened his actions to rape, but the liability was officially called sexual abuse. Coming up, Donald Trump says he will be inheriting a bad economy when he takes office later this month.
The MSNBC website even uploaded the entire interview, but cut it off before he ever got to the point about electing Donald Trump because of his use of the term rapist. Considering that huge networks are owned by institutional investors that enjoy huge profits while income inequality is beyond the breaking point, I'm a little surprised that they didn't cut it off sooner. But he spoke truth from the beginning to the end.
Remember, it was just 4 years ago, about right now, that Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, Meta, pulled Donald Trump's accounts down after the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. And now you fast forward 4 years, Donald Trump threatening Mark Zuckerberg during the campaign. And it does look, just in the last few days, last couple of weeks, like full capitulation, giving Donald Trump exactly what he wants. What do you see in this move?
4 years ago, the term was called moderation. Now it's being called censorship. And with this decision, the CEO of Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, gets kind of a twofer. He gets to placate, at least temporarily, the president who threatened to put him in jail for the rest of his life. And he gets to save maybe upwards of $5 billion, which is how much they spend on their safety and security department. And at a price-earnings ratio of 30, that's potentially a $150 billion increase in market capitalization. Mark Zuckerberg owns 15% of the company. So you have what is effectively a get-out-of-jail card potentially from someone who appears to be an oligarch threatening to put people in jail, and add $15 to $20 billion to his net worth. The greatest trade of 2024. It wasn't Bitcoin. It wasn't NVIDIA. It was Elon Musk investing $250 million directly in the Trump campaign. And then when Trump won since the election, Elon Musk's worth has gone up $140 billion. So that's effectively, I believe, about a 56,000% return on investment. So we've gone full kleptocracy.
We're being told that MAGA doesn't like to be called an oligarchy or a fascist movement. But when someone like Galloway breaks it down piece by piece in a way that most people don't have the time to really pay attention to, it lands in a way that confirms the use of those terms. And he was far from finished.
We can never, in my opinion, wave our finger at Russia again when the president, the elected president, is taking public trust and public authority and weaponizing governments and doling out capital and market share and contracts and threatening to use regulatory action against the competitors who don't give money to his inaugural committee or don't kind of bend the knee. We are effectively in a kleptocracy. Russia is the role model. We are becoming more like Russia every day. That's where we are.
It'd be tough to deny that when you actually listen to Trump openly tell billionaires that they'll be given preferential treatment if they give more money, that it isn't a blatant sell of power and influence to the highest bidders. He's never hidden it.
We're going to create the incentive theory again. In fact, I just announced yesterday, I didn't announce it for this reason, but anybody investing $1 billion or more gets a very expedited approval process, because, the approvals, when people come into the country, it takes them, in many cases, 14, 15, 16 years to get the approval. We'll try and push them as much as possible to get those permits very quickly. Like a nuclear power plant, I would say a week would be enough time. What do you think? Is that okay?
No one believes that the billions of dollars that Trump is planning to sell permits and a lack of regulation for will somehow benefit middle and lower earning citizens that do the work for these corporations to gain the immense wealth that they continue to simply use for more power and money. But again, Galloway wasn't done with how easily Mark Zuckerberg's adjustments harm those employees that do all that work.
I looked at all these adjustments that Zuckerberg was announcing. Some of them I think were significant. Some I think were a bit overblown. For instance, they already have offices in Texas, but he made a big stink about moving the content moderation office to Texas.
But the move to Texas not only pleases the conservative side of the aisle, which he's trying to do and has made several actions to try and come across as more conservative, it's the ultimate quiet firing. Because if you tell, rather than a series of bad press releases or uncomfortable all-hands meetings, if you just decide you're moving your safety and security team from California to Texas, you're naturally going to lose probably 30 to 50% of the employees. So this is again nothing about placating the Republican Party and saving money and adding shareholder value. And what is so shocking, just from a personal standpoint, what's the point of having all this money if you aren't at some point going to show some fidelity as a 40 or a 50-something-year-old man that has the wealth of the GDP of a Latin American nation to actually standing up and showing some fidelity to American values? Bezos has got the yacht. Tim Cook, Jensen Huang at NVIDIA is worth more than Intel or Boeing. At what point? When do the men show up here? When do the Americans show up here?
We've gotten so far from the idea of patriotism and America first having anything to do with investing wealth back into the country in ways that actually helps grow the country and minimize economic inequality, that the idea of firing workers to add to your wealth or laughing over busting up unions demanding a living wage and humane working conditions has replaced it as being pro-American.
What does that say about where American capitalism is going over the next 5-10 years?
I think it comes down to a basic question. What is America? And my kind of economic role model is Peter Drucker. I think an economy in America exists to create a robust middle class. The most ascendant countries over the last 20 years have been China and India. And it's a one basic litmus test. How many people are you bringing into the middle class? People like to fall back into this right-wing notion that it's naturally self-healing. It's not. It's an accident in history. Typically throughout history, you have a small number of people who weaponize government. They're very talented. They aggregate power. They weaponize government, and they aggregate more and more spoils. And then the good news is it's self-correcting. This level of income inequality is usually self-correcting. The bad news is the means of self-correction are typically war, famine, or revolution.
But no matter how clear it is that our unfettered version of capitalism that actually works solely for the benefit of the richest who can purchase our legislators, we gasp and defend the system when people like Luigi Mangione are celebrated by regular people, despite the racial and economic lines those in power continue to push on us. Ready for some more truth on tax policy now from Galloway?
The myth in tax policy is that the rich don't pay their taxes. That's just not true. The fulcrum is the following. There's super earners and super owners. The folks around your table are probably considered super earners. You make exceptional livings, but it's all current income reported on a W-2. And if you live in New Jersey or New York, you're probably paying 48 to 52% tax rates.
Right.
But if you're a super owner, I make my living starting and selling businesses. My last business, which was sold for $160 million, I'm very transparent about money. This gestalt or zeitgeist that people should not talk about money is nothing but an attempt to keep poor people down, because rich people talk about money all the time. It's important to be financially literate. The first $10 million for my $160 million sale was tax-free. My effective tax rate over the last 10 years has been 17%. The average tax rate on the wealthiest 25 Americans is 6%. Corporate tax rates are at their lowest point since 1939. But this misdirect talking about tax rates misses the point. It's the tax code, which has gone from 400 pages to 4,000. And that 3,600 pages, quite frankly, is there to screw the middle class and continue to transfer more money to the super wealthy. The fastest growing demographic group in America is not seniors. It's not Latins. It's billionaires. And the weird thing about America is that we support it because our superpower is our optimism. The Achilles heel is that 99%, the bottom 99% who are getting screwed, don't mind these policies because they believe at some point they're going to be in that 1%.
Well, last thing here. You know, if we stop and think about how much angrier, desperate, and drug addicted we are as a society, we should be able to connect those negative feelings back to how we're forced to live. And the oligarchy that benefits from our depressive state uses those feelings to pit us against each other for the sake of clawing each other's eyes out to get as much of a piece of what they control over us as possible.
Just let me go to the psychology of happiness. I think a lot about happiness because I struggle with it, Joe. You effectively, once you get above a certain level of wealth, you get no incremental happiness. So why on earth would you not go back to a tax policy of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where say above, pick a big number, 10 million, you actually pay more than 10%, maybe more than 20%, maybe more than 50%, because the difference between 30,000 a year for a household and 50,000 is enormous to the well-being of that household. Low-income kids in low-income households have higher resting blood pressure, but the difference between making 10 million a year and 15 million a year offers you no happiness.